Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle and I'll be your webinar moderator today. Today's webinar is sponsored by NatRoad's Platinum partner, PACCAR and the dealer network. Whether it's moving freight across the nation or going the last mile, their DAF trucks are always delivering. Today's webinar is being presented by Aaron de Rozario, Executive Leader, Regulatory Reform at the National Transport Commission. Aaron joined the National Transport Commission in July 2021 and is responsible for NTC's regulatory reform initiatives portfolio, including the automated vehicle, heavy vehicle, and legislative reform programs. Aaron has over 20 years public sector experience in both Australia and the United Kingdom and has a strong record of achievement in the economic development, education, social justice policy and transport portfolios. He has advised the Western Australian and Victorian governments on industry reform, regulatory matters, and the impact of technology on public policy. Prior to joining the NTC, Aaron was Chief Executive Officer of Commercial Passenger Vehicles, Victoria. Aaron will be happy to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So welcome, Aaron, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. Yes, my name is Aaron de Rozario. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands on which we're meeting or watching this webinar, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to thank NatRoad for the opportunity to be speaking to you today on the Heavy Vehicle National Law Safety and Productivity Program. I'm looking forward to giving you an overview of that program and the various elements of work that we're undertaking at present and over the next 18 months, and look forward to an opportunity to answer any questions that you might have about the program. So, what is the HVNL Safety and Productivity Program? It's a program that commenced in May 2021, when ministers approved a program covering off the 6 areas that you can see here on the right-hand side of your screen. So that 6 areas that we're looking at cover off operator assurance, technology and data, duties and driver health, fatigue management, vehicles and access, and of course, legislation, which is putting together a new heavy vehicle national law and the appropriate supporting regulations. Now, this slide here shows you some of the program timelines, and you can see on the left-hand side, around 2021, we have the ministers approving the program of work. We have, between June and September, worked very closely with jurisdictions, defining what kind of work we're going to be doing and defining the outcomes that we want to achieve. In October, you can see there was an important meeting of departmental secretaries. And at the moment, we are in this phase where we're undertaking industry workshops, jurisdictional working groups and the like. And you can see as we go into 2022 to 2023, we'll be drafting the new law for early 2023, where ministers approve that law and Queensland take it through to Parliament. Now, one of the questions that was asked of me by NatRoads was, what happened between the Heavy Vehicle National Law Review and this particular program of work? Why did one transition to the other? And so the Heavy Vehicle National Law Review did a great deal of work in understanding the problems and the challenges of the existing law. And there was a very good consensus about what needs to change. However, there wasn't consensus necessarily about how we do that change. So we have a good understanding of the what. Now we need to work through the how. And so the program that we're doing at the moment, the HVNL Safety and Productivity Program, really focuses on the how things change. And I hope to give you a bit of an overview about those elements as we go forward. So this is the program timeline, and you can see we are currently at the end of, or heading towards the end of 2021, and we're looking at having that new law ready to go to the Queensland Parliament in early 2023. So I'd now like to talk you through the various different strands of work that we're covering off as part of this program. The first one is legislation. And I'll put legislation first because for the NTC, our primary focus is drafting a new law. What we know and what we've agreed that that law needs to be is it needs to be simpler. So we're going to be focused on simplifying that law. We need to make sure it's fit for purpose. That means the law achieves the kind of outcomes that everyone's agreed it needs to achieve. and that includes balancing safety and productivity. We need to make sure it's an outcome-focused law, so it's less prescriptive. We need to make sure it's more flexible, so that as things change, as technology changes, as business models change, the law is able to accommodate those changes. We want to shift obligations down the legislative hierarchy. What does that mean? It means at the moment, there are lots of things that are in what we call statute law or the primary law. We want to move some of those things down into the regulations because regulations are more easily changed and more easily adapted. We also want to take things from those regulations into perhaps some other kinds of instruments, be it gazettal notices or maybe documents published and made available by the regulator. We want to make sure we move everything down that hierarchy so that we can achieve that flexibility and achieve that simplification process I talked about. And of course, a really important piece with the new law is we want to make sure that it incorporates appropriate sanctions and penalties so that the penalty for a particular breach is commensurate with the kind of risk that that breach leads to. So we have a general consensus on what needs to change, and our work will be on how we make those changes. And of course, the legislation will embody all the elements of our program, and they will all come together to help develop that new law. Operator assurance. So with operator assurance, we know that we are going to replace the current NHVAS scheme in the law with a new Australian Heavy Vehicle Operator Certification Scheme, or ABOX. Now that new scheme will have at its heart safety management system principles. So to be certified, you will need to make sure a business has a comprehensive safety management system in place. And of course, we don't just want that to be a tick the box. There is a document that is a safety management system. We want to create a culture. And when I say we, collectively ourselves, regulator, industry, create a culture where safety is part of core business and that people are actively managing safety, not just creating documents. But at the heart of the new certification scheme will be safety management system principles. We want to have this scheme work on an expandable set of risk-based modules. So you'll be familiar with fatigue management as a module, mass management is another module, vehicle maintenance. We want to make sure that the number of risk-based modules can be expanded as required. So if something that we can't even conceive of today, automated heavy vehicles, for example, we're able to put easily in place a risk-based module that might cover off automated heavy vehicles or some other kind of business model or system that might not yet exist. Likewise, we might look at other ways of creating risk-based modules that cover task-specific activities. So we want to make sure there is an expandable set of risk-based modules. We also want to ensure that there's a robust and consistent auditing regime so that there is a standard for auditing and people can be confident in what that standard is, and we can make sure that there is an auditing regime and access to auditors that are able to adhere to that particular standard. Now, this also ties in somewhat to making sure we have effective mutual recognition of operator accreditation schemes in the non-participating jurisdictions, such as Western Australia and the Northern Territory, so that there is consistency between how auditing is approached across the nation. Other elements of the new certification scheme, flexible compliance options, so that there are opportunities for those operators that get themselves certified to be able to comply with the law and comply with their obligations in more flexible manners. We want to ensure that the certification scheme enables and encourages the use of technology. And that includes circumstances where technology can assist with compliance and where technology can be a pathway to an alternate compliance option. And of course, tied in directly with that is making sure that the law and the scheme is better equipped to deal with changing technology and circumstances. So again, as business models change, as the types of vehicles that operate on our roads change, we're not necessarily talking about things that happen in the next 12 or 24 months. We're talking about what might happen in 10 years so that the law and the certification scheme are well set up to be able to adapt and change as circumstances change over time. And of course, quite fundamental. We want to make sure we have appropriate transition arrangements from the existing NHVAS to A-blocks. Second important strand is technology and data. Now, through the HVNL review, there was a very strong view that industry, jurisdictions, the regulator want to encourage the use of technology so that people can get the benefits of technology, be that productivity improvements, so that we can explore better and different ways of demonstrating compliance and of monitoring risks, in particular monitoring risks. So you can actively monitor risks such as fatigue and other kinds of risks using technology, and that the law won't get in the way or otherwise make that process of adopting technology slow. So we want to make sure that the new HVNL encourages adopting technology, encourages standards and interoperability. Okay, so we'd like people to have the confidence that if they are investing in technology that has been certified for use under the HVNL, that they would be able to change suppliers, change that technology base with a level of confidence that the technology is going to do what it's supposed to do, and that the data that it produces, that the technology produces, is going to meet any required standards. So we want to ensure that we're encouraging standards and interoperability. And of course, very importantly, we want to encourage safe and responsible use of data. Now, one of the NTC's learnings from its automated vehicle program, and in particular, some work that we've done on vehicle-generated data, is that it is absolutely essential that you have the right kind of environment to encourage people to make investments of data. And that means people need to know with confidence how technology is going to be used, how data is going to be used, what that data is going to be used for and by whom, so that they have confidence that if they invest in a particular technology solution, if they invest in a particular data solution, they know how the information that they are capturing and potentially transmitting to other people is going to be used. So if it's going to be used for a compliance purpose, they know it's going to be used for a compliance purpose. If it's going to be used for a network planning process, which is something that jurisdictions can see definite benefits in, they know how it's going to be used for network planning. So we want to make sure that we've got that environment that gives you, industry people, confidence in investing in technology, so that when you make those investments, you know how that technology is going to be used, what your obligations are, and of course, how your data is going to be used by others. And of course, some of those core key benefits that technology can bring include the better fleet management, advanced fatigue management, helping inform future infrastructure, and of course, making it much easier to keep records. Now, some of the critical pieces that we're looking at, or some of the critical drivers for this, of course, is that the current law doesn't easily allow us to integrate new technologies. So yes, there are some systems in place like electronic work diaries and the IAP. However, it's not easy, it's not straightforward for new technologies to be recognised under the law and therefore to be used, particularly to demonstrate that you're properly managing your risks. So it's been complicated. There's been limited support for the data sharing, and there are clearly some opportunities to improve roles and responsibilities between those that generate data and those that are ultimately going to be using data. So this technology and data piece is going to be really important, and it's going to start helping inform certification. It will help support certification, and will help support other elements of the law as well. So some of the critical work that we are doing in this space is recognising the technologies and data that already exist, that we want to make sure that we can transition across to the new arrangements. And of course, really important is establishing privacy, data usage and data protection parameters. Now that may draw on existing laws at federal and state level, but as I said, it's really critical that operators and industry have a strong understanding about the data privacy, data usage and data protection elements that the law will contain. Duties and driver health. So there's a range of elements that were agreed coming through the Heavy Vehicle National Law Review, which we are now putting the detail in, working through the how of those elements. So that includes expanding the number of parties that will be covered by the primary duty as part of the chain of responsibility. There were lots of inputs from industry, and we're going through all of those and testing those as to where they ought to sit and see how they ought to sit within the chain of responsibility. We are looking to make sure that we are more clear in how the primary duty that everyone is subjected to is expressed in the law, so it's a bit more explicit about the kinds of risks. And again, this isn't about changing the primary duty, it's about making it more clear for operators, more clear for people who are in the chain of responsibility, what kind of risks they need to be thinking about. Another important piece here is we want to ensure that there is a requirement that a person not drive a heavy vehicle if they are not fit to do so. So we already have that requirement that there's a duty not to drive while fatigued. We want to ensure that covers off also that people don't drive if they are not fit to drive. And that covers off things like temporal medical conditions. So be it a very bad headache, you know, a sore back or a leg or something that gets in the way of them being able to operate a vehicle safely. We want to make sure it's quite clear that they shouldn't be operating that vehicle. And of course, we want to make sure we have a driver health management standard to cover off elements such as medical conditions and more actively manage health for drivers in heavy vehicles. Fatigue management, one of the most important areas. We had a very important workshop just over a week ago covering off some of the elements of fatigue. And it's one of those areas which I know NatRoad's members and participants in this webinar will be very interested in. So what are we working on? First and foremost, performance-based and tiered fatigue management is part of the new law. So there will be opportunities for people to demonstrate that they are actively managing risk, and therefore, much as you currently have with your BFM and AFM, opportunities to manage the outcome, performance-based outcomes of fatigue, and not just simply follow a set of prescriptive rules. However, one of the requirements in this program is that we develop a simpler general schedule, or the base work and rest hours, for those drivers that work and operate in non-certified environments and arrangements. There will always be some operators who will prefer a simple, straightforward set of rules to follow. And until such time as we have ubiquitous fatigue detection and monitoring technology, that's going to exist as a base. And so one of our tasks is to make sure that we have a simpler general schedule that can be used for those operators that are looking for that. And of course, as I've already said, that performance-based and tiered fatigue management for those that are more actively managing fatigue risks and want the additional flexibilities that brings. The other really important piece is you want to maximize the appropriate coverage of fatigue regulated vehicles. So which heavy vehicles out there should be covered? We want to make sure that we're maximizing the coverage of fatigue requirements on the maximum number of vehicles, that it is fair and reasonable to do so. So it's a very important piece of work that we're working on there. And with all of these are things that we will be discussing closely with industry throughout this program, so that associations like NatRoads and others are across what the thinking is and how the policy detail, or the how, is being developed. Now, as I mentioned, on the 25th of October, we had a workshop which looked at the general schedule. Now, we were already operating on some general parameters for this particular program, and that was that the base work hours shouldn't increase and the base rest hours shouldn't decrease. And of course, the third really important one is that there is improved driver and enforcement understanding, so that the rules are easier to understand for both drivers, but also easier from an enforcement perspective, so that they're simpler. Our workshop outcomes, the key workshop outcomes from the 20th of October is that it confirmed the status quo for upper work limits. Those current upper work limits are appropriate. And of course, the NTC can provide solid and informed advice on those upper work limits. So there were some very important outcomes that came from that particular workshop. We will be having many more workshops that will involve NatRoads on fatigue management and other topics, of course. And as we go through, we'll be going through the detail of each policy proposal, so that industry is across, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and they're informed all the way through this process. Vehicles and access, again, one of those very interesting and no doubt will be a hotly discussed topic. But with regard to vehicles and access, obviously we are looking to unlock productivity. So we want to make sure that vehicles can access all the roads that they can safely access. So that's a fundamental principle there. By the same token, we want to ensure that vehicles are not accessing roads and bridges and infrastructure that they can't safely access. One of the important changes that we will be working with jurisdictions and industry on is creating a performance-based access decision-making environment. What does that mean? It means we want to minimise the future need for permits so that people don't need to apply for permits, particularly permits which often get approved on a regular basis. We want to be able to think about access in terms of road and infrastructure performance. So a road might be able to handle vehicles of a particular mass, particular configurations, etc., particular widths. We want to ensure that we have an environment such that any vehicle that meets those performance characteristics for that road is able to access that road. So that ultimately you would be able to plan your heavy vehicle trip based on the performance characteristics of bridges, roads, other infrastructure, and of course, the vehicle configuration that you're using. In an ideal world, this could operate a bit like Google Maps. And I use that just as a sort of a simple example, where you're able to plug in the configuration of your vehicle and what it is that you're carrying, the mass that you're carrying, say that you want to go from point A to point B, and you're able to find out what route you're allowed and able to take without needing to apply for a permit. So we want to minimize routes requiring permits. And of course, if we minimize the number of routes that require permits, then you won't have, or you won't be subject to the red tape of having to make applications and the like. And there will be a better and simpler access regime. Other critical bits that we are looking at doing, of course, is some risk-based vehicle inspections, or having a framework for that. And the heavy vehicle regulator is working on some policy work for that, as well as refining the PBS system and vehicle classifications and classes. Access is one of those elements that comprises changes that will happen within legislation and things that will be put into the new law. So ideally that whole performance-based access decision-making will be a component of the new law, but there are some other things that can happen sooner than that, because a lot of the access decision-making components sit outside of the law. And so we're looking to identify and progress faster changes in this space. And of course, to do that, we have to work very closely with road managers and the owners of infrastructure to see what we can achieve in that space. Again, we will always be talking with NatRoads about these issues. So yeah, just to highlight the work that's underway on access. So we are looking at potential pathways to increase height, mass and width. We're looking at linkages with a New South Wales-led review of the National Access Framework. I've already spoken about the risk and performance-based approach to access decision-making to reduce the need for permits and revise statutory timeframes. And again, when it comes to the vehicle classifications and classes, PBS improvements and the risk-based vehicle inspections, they are pieces of work that we are getting underway or have underway, and we will be continuing to talk to NatRoads about the content and where we're heading with those pieces of work. So that's an overview of the various projects and the components that make up the Heavy Vehicle National Law Safety and Productivity Program. I do want to talk a little bit about the engagement. We know that regular and ongoing discussions with the industry is essential. Okay, as I said, we are looking at making sure we can deliver the how of this program, how we make the changes that are necessary. And for that, we need to make sure that we do have that ongoing dialogue with industry. And that happens through a number of forums. There's the industry advisory group that NatRoads is a part of. We will be having topic-specific workshops on different items. And of course, there will always be bilateral and small group discussions. At the same time, we'll also be having meetings with jurisdictions, and as much as possible, we want to ensure that there is opportunities for jurisdictions to hear industry and for industry to hear jurisdictions' perspectives. But the thing I do want to emphasise, very primary thing, it is always important that your voice is heard. Industry is a key stakeholder in the new heavy vehicle national law, so it's always critical that you are part of the conversation with this. So that's my brief overview of the HVNL Safety and Productivity program. And so I'm very happy to turn over to some questions.
Thank you, Aaron. We do have quite a few questions, actually. So the first one is, what has happened with regard to cost-benefit analysis of various proposals? These weren't present in the consultation regulation impact statement, and therefore the options from that process are useless. What is the NTC doing in this area?
So as I said, the primary outcome of that series was to determine what needs to change, and the program we're working on now focuses on the how. As we finalise the various different policy pieces around fatigue and around all the other elements, those that require cost-benefit analysis will have a cost-benefit analysis, and that will be rolled up into what we call the decision RIS. Now, we will be very open and collaborative with industry as we start putting together these, whatever requires a cost-benefit analysis, so that you'll be able to see that cost-benefit analysis coming together. And therefore, when we get to that final point where we have a decision RIS, which is what they're called, or a DRIS, organisations like NatRoads and, by extension, your members will have a very good idea about the cost-benefit analysis of the final decisions being made and the final policy positions. And of course, there won't be any surprises with those final policy decisions.
Thank you. The next one, how much attention is the NTC paying to the extremely poor enforcement and sanction regime under the HVNL? Surely that subject should be given a priority rather than left hanging?
So I can assure you it certainly won't be left hanging. So yes, we have a considerable priority on making sure that the compliance powers that need to be in place, that they're right and appropriate, and of course, making sure that the sanctions are balanced properly. So at the end of the day, every element of the new HVNL has to be discussed, has to be worked through, and we need to be having those discussions with industry. So I can assure you that the sanction regime is part of that. It won't be left hanging, and it will be discussed with industry as it gets developed.
Thank you. Also, why start with assurance? Shouldn't that come after the prescriptive requirements are established so that regulatory concessions are clear?
That's a very good question. I think that there are two things that we need to think about assurance. First of all, there is the legal mechanism for the assurance framework. Okay, so that is, where does it sit in the law? What is the decision-making required to assure or certify an operator? So there are two parts to that assurance piece. One is the mechanics of how it would work. And then the second bit is the detail for each one of those modules that you can be certified in. And so I think there is, and I'll emphasize, we're working on all of these pieces simultaneously. So yes, there is a piece there about the mechanical framework of the certification system, but that bit about how does it link into the prescriptive parameters, I think that was the phrase that was used in the question. Yes, those things we do need to have a solid understanding of what those prescriptive requirements will be, and that will certainly inform what the alternate compliance options would look like. But to sort of reiterate that answer, there are two parts to certification: the mechanics of the framework, and then the detail of each certification module. And the detail of the certification module will need to be informed by the prescriptive requirements.
Thanks. Reliance on IAP seems to be happening going forward. Surely IAP has shown to be a failure. Why rely on this?
What we are looking to make sure we do is that all those kinds of schemes, we want them to be more effective going forward. So wherever there's opportunities to improve, improve access overall, that's what we're looking to achieve. So yeah, there are things that we sort of reference as sort of marker points, IAP being one of them. We reference BFM and AFM as marker points because there are things that currently exist. But ultimately, I think we have a shared desire, I think everyone has a shared desire for those schemes to work more effectively than they do. So that, again, going back to that principle, particularly around access, that vehicles get maximum access to as much of the road network that they can safely access, and that access process is as simple and easy as possible.
Great. Next question. Why can't some of these things be done earlier than 2023, like fitness to drive, which we need now?
So some of those things can be. So some things will be worked into the law. Those things that can be worked outside of the law will be worked on outside of the law. And if we can get those things up and running outside of 2023, then yeah, wherever possible, wherever something can be achieved without a legislative change, we'll be looking at seeing what we can do to achieve that without a legislative change.
Thank you. Next one. Counting time shouldn't be a focus of the law. What is the NTC doing to move away from that?
So there are two parts to that. So first of all, there is always going to be that base work and rest hours, as I said earlier in the presentation, for those operators that just want a very simple set of rules to follow. And that is at this stage certainly going to be informed by counting time and rest. As we start looking at certifying operators in fatigue, we certainly want that outcome-based focus. And we've been in conversations with the heavy vehicle regulator, the NHVR, about how the criteria that we can do for assessing that performance-based fatigue management. But it is a case that everyone wants to see that fatigue is being managed as a risk and not as a paper counting exercise. So I think there's agreement on that, and that will be worked through as part of our fatigue work, and particularly part of the fatigue certification work. But there will always be that requirement for, well, I shouldn't say always, but certainly in the foreseeable future, there will be that requirement for some kind of base schedule of work rest for those operators that just want and only require that simple schedule.
Great. So for the vehicle and access section you referred to, for access, does this mean that the bridge formula will be standardized across the country?
I'd like to say yes to that, but I can't. We need to still work a lot with the jurisdictions about how that works. I think ultimately it's the outcome of whatever calculation that is going to be used to inform an access decision-making piece or inform that performance-based outcome. So if a bridge is designated as being able to handle, a certain height, a certain width, certain axle mass, then that's the criteria that would be used for determining whether a vehicle can get access. How that formula or how the performance criteria of infrastructure is determined, that may still vary depending on the road manager.
And just following on that, in terms of engagement, how will road and infrastructure owners be consulted in relation to access?
Yes, so we certainly engage closely with the jurisdictions, and as we engage with jurisdictions, that includes discussions with various road managers so we understand their perspectives.
And doesn't the AHVOCS already exist as the master code? What about TruckSafe, which can already add relevant modules? Is this just for operator licensing?
So the current scheme, or the proposed scheme, essentially is a scheme whereby the regulator will be able to make a decision that somebody meets the requirements of certification and therefore provide appropriate regulatory exemptions. So what we're trying to do is make sure that that is embedded in the law and that it has the kind of flexibility to adjust to different things as I said previously, as circumstances change or technologies change or business models change. So again, it's about having that scheme within the law the regulator can make a decision about certification and that can lead to alternative compliance options.
Great. And the last question, can you confirm that current BFM operators will be automatically grandfathered into a new BFM equivalent system under the new accreditation process?
I can certainly say that there will be transition arrangements for BFM and AFM, and we'll continue having discussions with both industry and jurisdictions about what that looks like, and how that grandfathering scheme, or transition is probably a better phrase to use, how that transition will work. So that's part of the how discussions that we're currently having with jurisdictions, and we will be having with industry as well.
There's actually one last question that came in. Are there provisions being considered to have a review of infringements issued by the different enforcement bodies, especially the less serious matters? Given the type and level of enforcement on administrative errors in the current system, will you be providing a provision for better informed industry specialists to oversee the need for people to attend courts?
Well, we certainly want to review the range of penalties, particularly the administrative ones. It's been a very clear message from industry that that's problematic and that it doesn't necessarily contribute to safety outcomes. The processes for both issuing infringements and the review of infringements, again, that's part of the how conversation. So when we're talking about compliance and enforcement, we'll obviously be having conversations with jurisdictions, police forces as well, and industry about how that operates best. But we're very conscious and very aware of the issues that have been raised by industry about enforcement and inconsistent enforcement, and also administrative infringements.
Wonderful. So thank you, Aaron. That's all the questions for today, and it concludes today's webinar. If you have any questions, please send an email to info@natroad.com.au. Today's webinar was recorded and will be uploaded to the NatRoad website. I thank you all for attending today. Thanks very much, and thanks, Aaron.
Thank you very much.